Our next session here, we're going to kind of move down from the very fine, if somewhat gloomy, 30,000-foot view that Chris gave us, and we're going to talk about what people are really seeing on the ground in the market in Montana and also in Idaho. So for this session, we have Ed Morse, who is joining us from Coeur d'Alene. Where's Ed? If you could all just come up and we'll get your seats here. So we have Ed Morse, we have Mike Barrett, who's come over from Bozeman with Prudential Montana Realty in Bozeman to give us a look at that market. Mary Mari with the currently president of the Missoula Organization of Realtors. And we have Bill Perrin with Farmer State Bank, and he can tell us whether Chris's view of the credit situation and so forth is accurate according to what he's seeing. So as soon as we get the chair set up here, we'll get going. Well, thanks for joining us here and playing off of some of Chris's remarks, and I think he was pretty clear on what he views as the trends here and what we can expect. And I thought we might start out by asking Bill, what do you see in the credit market and specifically in the mortgage market? I mean, the subprime mortgage thing and the general kind of weakness, if not crisis, in the mortgage market is obviously driving a lot of what's happening in terms of real estate. And I was wondering, as a banker and as chief credit officer, what you see in your bank relative to what Chris was talking about.
Well, first of all, I need to preface that my view comes from pretty much the Valley County, but I think I don't think we're seeing a lot of problems from the subprime, other than the fact that it's changed the programs that are available, and we're seeing quite a big change in those. There's been a reaction. The Alt-A's have changed, the Jumbos have changed, so I think that market has changed dramatically in reaction to what's going on in the subprime, but it seems that those are starting to come back a little bit. Some of the programs we've seen taken away already are coming back. Some of the rates are starting to drop, but most of the work that we've done, has been in the standard secondary market mortgages, and of course the stuff we portfolio is pretty standard also. So I don't know, I heard earlier that we were seeing a lot of declines. I don't think our mortgage department would see that, but then traditionally we have not been in the subprime.
So you haven't actually seen a decline in mortgage applications or mortgage issued?
Yeah, our pipeline it is smaller than it has been, but I don't know if I could say maybe 20%. I don't know what's in most of our business is referral, so I don't know. We're not a big player, but it's still been fairly busy.
Mary, in terms of and maybe you have some data, but in terms of actual home sales, new home sales, and prices in the Missoula market, what have you seen over the last 6 months?
Over the last 6 months, we're still pretty steady. The lower end is down, as well as the 350 to 400, but it's still steady in the median price range of the 200s and in the 4 to 500s. And when you say it's down, like how far down is down? I mean, Chris is talking about 20% decline in prices. I mean, no, we're not seeing that. I'm not as depressed after listening to Chris as I thought I would be. It was good, bad, worse, and why not to worry so much? Maybe we are behind the national market by a year or so, but I think as far as the Missoula area, we didn't see the increase in 1995 to 2005 like this. It was more of a steady increase. So I don't think we're going to see the 34% drop that they saw from 2005 to 2006 in the other markets. We may not have a soft landing, but I don't think we're going to have the hard landing.
Mike, in Bozeman, I think Bozeman might have been a little bit, and Big Sky in particular were probably frothier than Missoula. I'm wondering what you have seen in terms of price declines and in particular what segments are weaker than others.
Well, I think to Mary's point, I think the markets that we deal in Montana certainly don't have the velocities that the markets that people are using to demonstrate that the bubble and the hard or soft landings are inevitable. For example, Bozeman, Montana, and my bio part that probably no one read, which is good, is that I don't team rope anymore because I've got 2 bad knees. And I've been in the area for 7 years instead of 4, nearly 8 years. So my first 3 years were in Big Sky doing a resort development called the Big Easy. And I remember moving to Bozeman in '99 and seeing land prices in the Big Sky area. If all of the Montana people remember, back in the mid to late '90s, we went to the aliquot 20s because all the subdivision rules were changing and they were going to go to 160-acre parcels instead of 20s. So people that created the Yellowstone Club and some other large resort developments very quickly rushed out and created all these aliquot 20s. My investor group sent me to Montana to research the Big Sky market, and this was in '97, '98, and I said, well, you know, you really can't see much going on. And that was pretty much the truth. There wasn't a lot going on. We were acquiring 20-acre parcels, in some cases for less than $100,000. Those 20s in today's market are selling anywhere from $750,000 to over $1 million. So real estate, in my 25 plus years of experience, if you're in the development business, you make your money on the buy. You make your money when you acquire the property. Development is so front-end loaded that there's just, it's very hard and it's very unpredictable. And I think that's one of the things when you talk about the macro and the micro part of the real estate markets. We, in a micro sense, are in a market. Bozeman, from 1990 until the year 2000, grew by 1,000 people. So do people in Bozeman that have been there and have some historical perspective feel like we've been in a boom for the last 5 years? We had 1,500 people move there last year. So it seems like a boom, but in real terms, it's really very, I think, good growth or strong growth, but not over the top. And Montanans, you know, being an agrarian type state, you have people that, to the bank's interest, to the mortgage lender's interest, we had real equity in our markets. And so I don't think we're going to have that big swing with a lot of, you know, certainly the subprime market in Bozeman, and I deal primarily in commercial development, but I don't know that we had much of a component of that. And so I don't, you know, Bozeman, building lots, we've created a lot of lots, or at least we have preliminary platted a lot of lots. Now, the realization of those 6,000 lots, how many are actually going to be put through the final plat? Based on the tenor of this conference, probably a lot of the developers, if they were here, they would be thinking about planting wheat.
Well, you said money is made on the buy. I mean, would you buy property in Bozeman and Big Sky in particular right now?
Well, my investor groups we were acquiring from '99 to about 2003, and then we've not had any acquisitions in the last 2 or 3 years. We've been working on the development and implementation phase of bringing commercial projects online. So I think in the larger view, when you have a community like Bozeman that is experiencing some growth and a lot of people are moving there that are bringing their jobs with them, which is really skews our numbers when you look at what the median income range is for Montana, and then you see Bozeman and you see our median or average house is $248,000 or $278,000. Well, that's considerably higher than some of these other markets. So there are people that are still looking to buy. I think the buying frenzy, if you call it that, when people are going out and paying $60,000 or $70,000 or $80,000 an acre for a 20-acre parcel that potentially could be developed into home sites, those are some people that, you know, they probably do have some reason to pause or certainly to be concerned. So if that answers your question.
All right, thanks. Ed, tell us a little bit about Coeur d'Alene. I mean, Chris said that the Idaho was a more of a bubble even than some other places. Obviously, there's been extraordinary growth in northern Idaho for quite a while. What are you seeing in terms of the market trends in northern Idaho?
Well, Kootenai County is one of the fastest growing counties in Idaho. It probably has the potential for as much market froth and has had a number of years worth of both good investment and speculation in it. Kootenai County generally grew in terms of population about 26% from 2000 to 2006. In terms of population growth, we're about 4 times the national average. In terms of job growth, we created in the last 2 years 7,500 jobs in Kootenai County. And that's a county with a population now of about 133,000 people. In terms of residential change in price, our median home price in Bonner County and Kootenai County went from $159,000. It's now $271,000 in 2006. This would be a change between 2004 and 2006. $159,000 to $271,000 in Kootenai County, $159,000 to $320,000 in Bonner County. Incredible, huge changes that created a tremendous amount of angst, a tremendous amount of frustration, a tremendous amount of backlash for growth. In-migration in terms of Kootenai County results, it drives about 80% of home sales. Because of our expanding economy, our expanding jobs, our unemployment rate in Kootenai County is about 1.8%. I think it's the second or third lowest in the country. We have gone from a labor surplus market, attracting industry, to a labor shortage market. And the trends, those kinds of trends, drive a strong economy. Against that, this rapid run-up in appreciation, a tremendous amount of new inventory in the pipeline, tremendous amount of additional platting, additional supply pipeline, a huge component of the local economy that's driven by construction and construction jobs, makes the economy much more volatile, much frothier. We went from 7 condo plats in 2004 to 520 condo plats in 2006. We have no apartment construction market. That's gone away, all condominiums. So there's a number of different factors and interplay in a very dynamic, rapidly growing economy there. And we've got some froth in it. We've got some very weak lower segments of that housing market. That $200,000 to $300,000 value price is oversupplied, and it's probably the area where the people are most vulnerable in terms of income and credit rating. Up in the housing segments for the gated communities, the resort golf developments, we're seeing excess inventory, but relatively no change, and those communities are essentially being marketed to that 80% of growth and in-migration into the community, and people that don't even live in that community. They're higher income individuals that are being drawn to the area for retirement and resort purposes.
So I wanted to talk a little more about that segment question. So you talked about the segment of 200 to 300,000 being weak. Is that, first of all, is there a segment below that, or is that the kind of the baseline pricing there?
Baseline in my community now, generally speaking, it's very hard to buy a home for less than 200,000. So that's the floor for all practical purposes.
Okay, so you're saying the bottom end of the market, 200 to 300, is weak with
Yes.
oversupply, declining prices.
Oversupply, inventory probably went from in late 2005, we probably had 2 months inventory on the market. I would say we've probably got 12 to 16 months inventory on the market. And of course, you've got to have building inventory before you can have soft pricing and a decline in price. But all the indications for that lower market segment are there. And there is already some price erosion. I would say probably in terms of real dollars, we're probably looking at 5 to 10%, and we probably got on the horizon another 5 to 10%, maybe even worse than that, depending upon how long this credit crunch lasts and things like that. The thing that we've got going that tends to mitigate that is a very strong job-creating economy within that county.
Mm-hmm. So 200 to 300 very weak. Another segment, sort of the next segment up, being sort of 300 to 500. How has that performed?
Increasing building inventory, much less price erosion. In terms of volume, a much smaller portion of the market. But it's also an area that, because you've got a larger section of inventory backlog and more of those kinds of units in the pipeline, because we've had a lot of activity, and there's, if you're working off of a 10% price margin, there's a lot more profit using 10% of a $700,000 home than 10% of a $225,000 home. So we've got the same problems in terms of inventory backlog and oversupply that are overhanging that element of the market.
And then how about the very high end? The lakefront property, $500,000 and up, fancy new gated golf communities, the sort of real high end. And one of the questions that's been in my mind, you look around and from the Yellowstone Club to the Black Rock development to all kinds of things, you've got a huge amount of activity in the very high end, essentially second home market for people who have $1 million to spend on a second home. And I wonder how deep and strong that piece of the market is.
Well, that's I'm not sure that anybody really knows the answer to that, because some of those people may find their portfolios repriced here in the next couple of years. But there's been a huge amount of development activity, including some that has attracted national attention and regional and national developers into Kootenai County because of views, recreation, diversified recreational opportunities, strong economy, and some really unparalleled amenities. And we've had 2 private gated golf resorts that have been built. One of them is in the process of expanding to about 1,800 acres, over 700 units. Your entry-level housing in that kind of a development is probably close to $1 million, and much of it is well above that, multiples of millions. And those, again, are being marketed to people outside the area, and a lot of the people that are coming in and buying that kind of product, seasonal homes. Gaza Ranch is under development now. They've finished the golf course. We have 2 other golf course resort developments that are seeking approval and on the drawing boards in Kootenai County. Kootenai County has got 11 18-hole golf courses and 2 more under construction, and 2 more developments that have been turned down and are trying to reapply. So resort golf, high end, being marketed in the Southwest and in the Rust Belt. Those are pretty attractive developments.
And you haven't seen the same kind of weakness there, or it's just hard to tell?
It's very hard to tell, because a lot of that information is closely held and privately held. Clearly there is some slowing, but as we've seen in waterfront and the high end of the resort market, those buyers and those individuals are not, they're insulated from the same type of financial pressure. They're not the people that were dependent upon spending their equity in their home. And this might be a second or third home for some of those people. And so it is an entirely different market than the average U.S. homeowner or consumer. And those markets are more fickle Everybody likes to make a good buy rather than a bad buy and not buy at the top of the market. But those markets still exist and will exist even through the bad times.
So I wonder, if, Mike, if you could address that sort of segment question in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And you mentioned the difficulty of knowing what's happening at the very high end, and we actually tried to analyze at New West. We tried to analyze a little bit what was happening at the Yellowstone Club and whether they were actually selling those lots down there, and it's hard to tell, basically.
Well, it's an interesting paradigm in the sense that Big Sky, Montana, when Chet Huntley first started that project up there in the 60s, and was able to entice some large corporate investors to participate with him because of his name primarily, and his wife being a Montana gal. But Big Sky as a resort, my first experiences in Montana were going to Big Sky in the mid-90s. There wasn't a tram at the top of the mountain. It was poorly run, which I think it's probably still poorly run in the sense that the operating company takes the money from Big Sky and spreads it around some of their other properties. But having said that, and then looking at what happened at Moonlight Basin, which when that project started, it raised the bar quite a bit for the resort market, at least in Gallatin County, in the sense that you had people. I remember looking at one of the real estate brochures in 94 or 95, and there was one home in Big Sky that was over $1 million. There's probably 20 under construction that are over $2 million or $3 million now. And I don't deal a lot in the resort market other than looking at some of the raw land opportunities. My group that I was representing actually bought some property that was adjacent to the Yellowstone Club, and it's had 2 or 3 owners since we sold it. I was part of a group that always had an old philosophy that you always try to leave a little bit of meat on the bone for the next guy. And I think that right now we're breaking the bone and trying to suck the marrow out of it. But it's interesting to see in the midst of all these downturns. And I was actually in the banking business in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s. And it's an interesting situation when you get the nervousness or the angst that exists in the markets today, and people coming from the lender's side. The thing you don't want to do is you don't want to have to go find your customer. You want that customer coming to you acknowledging that we've got a problem. I've always heard that if you owe $1 million, it's your problem. If you owe your banker 10, it's your all's problem. So you become partners in default, basically, or by default. Those markets are interesting because to the point of people that are buying second and third and fourth homes, that is that rarefied air that most people don't have a concept of, people that can't even spend their interest in any given year. So Big Sky has been the beneficiary of that. The Yellowstone Club, with all the hype that was there, still only has maybe 50 to 75 homes that are actually constructed. A lot of lots have been sold. The facility is over the top. It is unbelievable. The Warren Miller Lodge, there are rocks in that lodge as big as this conference room. I mean, it's just an incredible showplace. But I think that the whole idea of private powder and having your own private ski resort appealed to a lot of people. Bill Gates bought a home there, I think, primarily because of the security. That his family, his son, can go get on the ski lift by himself and not having to have 4 security guards around him. So there are more people than we think of that have those kinds of dollars, that are spending them obviously in Idaho and Montana and other places that have spectacular resort areas. I think one of the interesting things in this overall market is that when you look back, and I was actually a mortgage lender in the early 70s when I got out of college, and you look at the shift in perception of people's ownership of a home. Through the technology that we've all been benefactors of over the last 10 or 15 years, We've become a much more transient society. That old deal of living in a house that, you know, your parents lived in, those days have been long gone for a number of years. But I don't have the number, somebody probably here does, but I would suspect it's much more than, you know, a 5 to 7 year turn on these houses. And, you know, people reaching kind of for the next bar up. But the resort areas, there's some installation there, but it's being affected. Sales are down. You know, we are experiencing that in Bozeman as well. So as far as the future of the trends and how far and how deep this cut goes, I think to Chris's point, although he probably told a lot of us things we didn't really want to hear, the realities are what they are. And I think in markets like this, through these corrections, there's a lot of opportunity as well.
Mary, in Missoula, Ed talked about that kind of 200 to 300 segment. You know, Missoula, maybe the low end is slightly lower, but not much. Are you seeing similar kind of phenomenon there? He talked about kind of 5 to 10% price decreases, a lot of weakness in that sort of what's now the entry level for housing.
We're not seeing the 20%. I think, like I said, we're behind, and we may not see that big of decline. And our lower end is more of the 150 to 200. Our median is about 206,000. So that's still strong. The 200 to 300 is still a very strong market. 3 to 4 is a little weaker. 4 to 5 is still strong.
And sort of 4 to 5 and up is still strong, would you say? Or
I'm
about
not sure above 5, but 4 to 5 is strong. I feel a little removed from the Big Sky and the Yellowstone Club. I was just thinking, I used to ski at Big Sky when there was, I think, 2 chairlifts. And my husband just came back from Big Sky where he was working, I think on the Warren Miller, I think on his lodge, and he had to commute from Bozeman to Big Sky because they couldn't afford to stay in Big Sky. So I'm a little removed from that aspect. I feel like I'd like to talk a little bit about the good news, and then I'll go to the bad news. But the good news, I think, is our economy, at least in the Missoula area and surrounding areas, is still very strong. Rates, fortunately, are still low. People are still coming to this area. And, you know, we have a limited amount of land here, so supply and demand and very little land. So that's the good news. I think the bad news is 15 years is such an extraordinarily long run for a housing market. So the market is correcting itself. People got used to using their houses as an ATM, at least a lot of people, and they've drained their equity out, and I think that's where you're seeing the trouble spots. I called a few realtors before I came here to see what their experiences had been, and they said that they think people are waiting. The sellers and buyers who can are sitting on the sidelines due to the national media attention of the housing market and the burst of the bubble. Also, their experience has been that people wanting to move here are unable to get their houses sold in other areas, so they're unable to buy in this area. But I think the housing correction will present a lot of opportunities. I've worked with buyers in a seller's market, mainly with buyers for the last 12 years, so we'll see how it turns around.
Good for the buyers, yeah. Bill, what's your thought on the sort of overall economic situation? I know Farmers is expanding. Obviously, the bank is bullish on the long-term growth of the greater Missoula economy. But what about the next 18 months or 2 years?
Well, I think, interestingly enough, we just did a shock test on our portfolio at 20%, and I want to comment, I'm really glad to hear Chris say that it looks like that 20% might hold, which made a lot of sense. I'll certainly take that home.
So a shock test, just to clarify, my guess is that would mean we looked at our portfolio, if prices declined 20%, what would that mean for us?
Actually, if they dropped 20%, then we took a look at what it would do to the values that we have in our portfolio.
Right.
And that's in our portfolio. So that was good news. I think that, you know, we're seeing, I want to comment a little bit on what our market is. The Valley County, our north market North Valley County pretty much follows Missoula. It's a commute, and so it follows more of the economy of Missoula. We have a mid-market that includes Hamilton that somewhat has its own economy now. We have GSK and the lab and some expansion there and some employment that is, I think, holding that market up pretty well. And then we have our south market, which probably follows more national. Those are larger homes, people coming from the outside buying property. So we kind of have three economies as I see it within the valley. To go back then and then predict 18 months, we'd say our north part of the valley is pretty much dependent on what happens in Missoula. They can come out and buy a little more property cheaper than you can in Missoula, and that pretty much drives that. The middle looks to be fairly strong, I think, because we do have the jobs. We're seeing a little bit of a deflation in real estate, like 6%. One of the appraisers told me the other day. And in the south
So
end,
it's 6%
the last year.
decline over the last year
Yeah.
in housing prices.
Right. Well, and actually, in what he's saying in appraised values, which is comparable sales, which translates through from sales, yes. The other side of it is, okay, let's go to the South Valley before we get off that. Then those are people moving in from the outside. And they're larger parcels, and there's a little blip of those going on, million-plus properties that have been selling primarily in the south end of the valley and along the river. And a little blip of those been selling lately, and I'm just, these are just ones that I know of. But I think in general, we're fairly confident for next 18 months. I think that, as I said, we're also making some moves. But one of the things I wanted to throw in regard to the Missoula economy and the market, which affects us certainly, is I listened to a guy talk the other day about his friends. He's an economist, and all of his friends were getting ready to retire. And rather than moving to Miami or to Nevada, to Phoenix or whatever, the three of them were moving back to their college towns. And I think we heard this a while back. I think we heard Dr. Swanson talk to us about that, about the strength of the Missoula economy, and this guy even reinforced that, said I think there's a number of people when the boomers, when they get ready to move, retire, they're not necessarily just going to where it's warm, they're going to go to where they're comfortable, and when you move back to a college town, they have the amenities, the cultural issues and that. So I think we would feel fairly positive about at least certainly part of our economy, the Missoula part, as well as our North Valley County.
And if I understood you right, the sort of south part of the county, which is more the kind of wealthy retirees moving in, that you're seeing a little bit weaker? Did I hear you right there?
I think it's a little weak, but I don't think it's that weak. I think the marketing time, if you look at the million-plus homes, I think the marketing time is stretching out. I think that's probably the way you'd have to look at it. But I'm just hearing their sales now. I mean, million-plus sales have been going on. I mean, and those people, again, are somewhat insulated. They're not worried. They've got money. And they're moving here. They've got all kinds of different stories, but they got money and got the ability to buy whatever they want.
I think people would be surprised that the majority of people moving to our area are either already in the state or they're coming back home, like you said, back to their college town or where they grew up, or people that are retiring. It used to be they were snowbirds. Well, now they are retiring to colder places like Montana, and we're seeing a lot of that. I think that's also boosting the condo sales. Are people coming back and retiring, or?
So people who want to live a more urban kind of lifestyle and. Yeah.
Right. The main concerns that I run into are they want to be close to medical facilities. They want to be within 30 miles of a major city, as we have it here. And that's the concerns I run into to folks that are retiring and coming up here.
Do we see any shift in that segment of kind of who's moving here, who's buying houses? I mean, is that changing at all?
Well, my last people were from Nevada, so maybe they're coming.
Refugees from collapsing housing markets in the Southwest?
The last statistics I saw, the highest number moving to Valley County were coming from Washington, not California. Now, we understand they had moved from California to Washington and then making another move, but they were coming from Washington, which is interesting of what's going on in the Washington market. That apparently is holding up. So if they can sell their home there, they may still move here and do all right. I think we're seeing more people. In the 80s, the fallout we had, we just couldn't sell real estate, period. There were no buyers, and we were no jobs. I think people are coming here today that are bringing their income with them. I think we're seeing much more of that, as well as people bringing their jobs, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's true. Again, working primarily in the commercial market and speaking about people that are bringing their jobs with them, it goes back to my point earlier. When you look at the median income in Gallatin County, and then how do you compare that to an average or median price that's in the mid-200s, those two numbers don't work together. And I think, again, part of the froth, as they call it, or the excitement in the market, the thing about real estate that's always been fascinating, that's made it a lot different than other things, the stock market probably has certainly a component of this, is the psyche, the part of the psyche that is involved in making a purchase. Certainly in the home market, you're dealing with something in most families' portfolio is the single largest investment they'll ever make. And there is a lot of emotion in home ownership. Commercial properties, when a guy's looking to relocate a business or he wants to expand, it becomes much more kind of pragmatic. You're looking at it and comparing one property to another. You'd like to have this one, but the other one would work just as well. So you take some of the emotion out of the market, and I think that in a rational way, although we probably always, the market is never in equilibrium for very long. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing is, and I thought this would probably be a room full of real estate people trying to finish up their continuing education hours. So I looked at the roster of the people that are attendees, and most of you probably should be up here in my seat, and I should be out there. But having been through some pretty dynamic markets in my 30-odd years of being in the business, yeah, I'm always fascinated with just the resiliency of markets. They, like Chris said, recessions don't last forever. Certainly trees don't grow to the moon either. And I think that's part of it is being able to look at this time as an opportunity. Now, many people out there haven't seen the 3 or 4 big drops in the market that some of us that have been in the market longer have seen in different parts of the country. But I think it's always important to remember, you have to look at the long term, but you can't disregard the short term as well. And the predictability from the development side has always been an issue. When you're dealing with local administrative, whether it be the city commission, planning department, county planners, Mary Sexton at the DNRC, we in an area like Bozeman, where you're experiencing growth that is really hard for people that are homegrown to get their head around the fact that Bozeman in 1970 was 22,000, and it grew 1,000 people in 10, from 80 to 90, and now we're 36,000 people, and the valley is approaching 80,000 people. And most of the forecasts, even the ones that are, if you just throw out the highs and the lows, you end up somewhere around between 150 and 250,000 people in Gallatin Valley, which is Bozeman, Belgrade, which I guess still is the fastest growing city in Montana. And then that, of course, encompasses a larger geographic area. Gallatin County is pretty big. But we've had tremendous influx of people coming in. I think the construction market has been a big part of it. But we've had residential lots now being developed out in the Three Forks area in Broadwater County simply because the predictability of development was much more stable. Going through and trying to deal with city commissions that change every 2 years, the dynamics change, planning departments overworked, maybe you've got a growth policy that you looked at in 2003 and now you look at it again and you wondered how you came up with those numbers or those ideas. So I think the whole package is what you have to look at in a sense of Montana as a state. I think Chris's numbers were pretty reflective. We probably will have less pain and suffering than some of the other regions. Certainly, you can't tell the developer that went out and spent $10 million on a 400-acre piece of ground, and he's got another $10 million to put in it before he can sell a lot, and he's going through preliminary plat right now. He's probably not very comfortable. Mm-hmm. You pro forma lots on an absorption basis, and the bankers know this. If you look at realistic terms, if someone could tell you you could go create 100 lots and you can sell them out in 3 years, and the price is X, that's fairly predictable. But if someone says, well, you buy it today for $3 million and it may take you 24 to 36 months to get your approvals and your preliminary plat, a lot can happen in that episode of time. So I think in the development business, in the world that I live in, we look for predictability because predictability will take you through the horizons of these blips in the market. You can't go buy a piece of property and develop it and turn it in 6 months. I mean, that's not realistic. So you've got to look at the longer term perspective of that project and know that in your sensitivity numbers, that if you're pricing those lots, a 12,000 foot lot at $100,000, and you and your banker agree that that's a good number, and then he makes the loan and you sign the documents, and then the market 24 months later says that's a $60,000 lot. You can't sit there and stare at each other like a couple of starving wolves. Somebody's got to do something. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we're approaching that part of the market. I did a lot of workouts with banks in the early 80s. I mean, think back. Interest rates were 13 to 16% in the mid 80s. Now, who can afford those kind of interest rates? Mm-hmm. So cheap money kind of caused part of the problem.
Right. Well, as Chris said, interest rates go up, prices go down, so it's a little bit of there's kind of an interplay there too. So, well, I think, to your point about there being a lot of people in the audience with a lot of expertise, would welcome questions or comments if people have comments to make or disagreements with what we're hearing on the panel. We'd be delighted to hear that. So just put your hand up, and Courtney or Matt will get you a microphone, and we can broaden the conversation here a little bit. Question at the back?
I'm wondering why there's nobody.
If you could identify yourself, that'd be great.
My name is Dave Brandt. I'm a rancher up in the Flathead. I'm wondering why there's nobody on the panel from the Flathead Valley, which seems to be a real bastion of growth right now.
Well, it's funny that you would ask that question, because this panel was always supposed to have somebody from the Flathead, and somebody agreed to do it and then dropped out, and we called a bunch of people, and we actually were supposed to have somebody from the Flathead, and in the vagaries of conference organizing, that just didn't happen. But there was actually no good reason for that. You could just blame it on us, but we did have that in mind, and we invited about 10 people, all of whom couldn't do it for one reason or another. So it was just one of those things. But certainly the Flathead, is a very dynamic place at the moment. So, and sorry if you were looking for that in particular. Other questions, comments?
I'm Robin Morton, and I'm Dave's neighbor. I'm from the Flathead also. But in these talks, I used to live in Detroit, and I have an engineering degree in automotive engineering, and the University of Michigan Graduate School of Automotive Engineering is called the Toyota School. And I've seen over the years, I'm 73, I've seen over the years the American auto business is going down the drain. And cities like Detroit are third world countries. Cleveland, Chicago coming. And the numbers that Chris was talking about, I think, are respective of large metropolitan areas where manufacturing was a big industry. And America's losing that industry today. We're becoming a service country. And Montana's always been a service country, and it doesn't hurt. We know how to live with the service industries. Whereas the big cities that depended on large manufacturing are going down the drain. So I think people are coming here. The country's polarizing. You're getting a large number of rich people, well, maybe not large in terms of the whole country, but in a large, huge population of lower income people. And the lower income people will buy, they have to buy, a cheap house. So the 200,000 and below, and I guess in my day that was not a cheap house, but today that's a cheap house. That market's good. I think it'll stay good. The market over 600,000-700,000, that'll stay good, because the people that have got the money will buy it. They don't care. They want to get away from the big cities. So I don't think Montana's got a real big problem. We know how to live in the service industry, and Flathead County's got a lot of services industry going, and I think Missoula, Ravalli County have got the same kind of things going on here. So I don't think we got the problems that Chris was talking about. But I think the rest of the country does, and the rest of the country is going to influence us if we're not careful.
Thanks. Another question in the back here, and then one in the middle front here.
Hi, I had a question about...
Could you identify yourself?
Yeah, I'm Annie Thompson. I'm from Flathead as well. Flathead County Planning and Zoning. And it seems like in the higher end development, we're seeing a lot of obviously high amenity developments. And I was wondering if any of you as realtors or people in the real estate industry have a pulse on whether or not we're seeing the same kind of changes in the middle income range of development, whether there's kind of a trend towards higher amenity or more community style developments and away from some of the more tract housing that we've seen in the past and still see very regularly.
So if I could sort of rephrase that slightly, if I understood you right. So on the demand side, is there more demand for kind of new types of planned communities as opposed to traditional tract housing developments?
Yeah, away from the higher end developments, sort of in the middle income development range.
Okay.
Well, I'll take a stab at part of that. One of the things that's happened in Bozeman is we do have a situation where we as the city, trying to come up with a way that we can create what Chris referred to as workforce housing or affordable housing. And those are problematic. I think there are a lot of cases that you can look around the country where when the city government gets involved in the housing markets and they try to manipulate pricing, and in fact we had one commissioner that in their opinion affordable housing should be a single family home, 2-car garage, Corian or marble countertops, a couple of bathrooms, and some of us in the meeting were, well, where does it say that home ownership is a right and not a privilege? And I think a lot of times, in the bureaucracies that we deal with and trying to get things approved, you accept things as part of the process. It may be a bitter pill to swallow, but I know in Bozeman, we have a lot of properties that are on the market that are considerably less than $200,000. And the fact that you feel like you're being deprived because you can't have a single family detached home and you're living in a condominium, to me is kind of the first step of home ownership. You have to build that equity. To Mary's point, a lot of people have used their homes as ATMs and they've taken all the equity out. So there probably are some pretty uncomfortable people that are trying to figure out how to get from A to B. But as far as developing amenities,
I think part of the question was whether the kind of style of development in terms of...
I was going to address that. I think the developers have realized that you can't just go do a stock 9,000, Everlots 9,000 square feet in one cul-de-sac per street and sell them, and 3 or 4 builders build them out and they all look exactly the same. You are seeing people coming in now, whether it be a golf course community, which we have a couple of, or people just coming in and saying, well, we're going to create more amenities within the development. The city has always pushed at a certain level to have neighborhood commercial. And just about every subdivision, and I don't know if that's the case in Missoula or not, but just about every new subdivision we have has a commercial pod that goes with it. And in many cases, some of those commercial pods are still undeveloped because the commercial market is driven by rooftops.
Ed, are you seeing shifts in that regard? And because I think some of the areas around Coeur d'Alene are kind of classic sort of massive tract housing without a lot of new urbanism features or things like that. Are you seeing any change in that?
Yeah, we've got both, and what's really popular in terms of the planning community, the new urbanism or the mixed use, works fine for large developments, and we're finding a lot of community opposition when you try to put those mixed uses in existing areas or infill places where you've got established, essentially low density detached tract homes, because that brings in a mixed use commercial development that they perceive as incompatible with the area. On the other hand, if you've got a larger 40 or 80 acre tract that you can develop around that kind of a design and make a community center and develop it to mixed use, it seems to go much better. But to try to adopt rigid design and development guidelines that force those into existing neighborhoods or infill locations, we've got an instance right now over in Kootenai County where the planners are essentially becoming the advocates for mixed use, and the neighborhood's opposing it.
And what about the buyers? So the neighborhoods, don't like change oftentimes. What on the kind of demand side, people are moving in, buying these houses. What are they looking for?
And that's the interesting thing, because every community and the dynamics in every community are a little different. But Kootenai County for decades has been a detached single-family home community in terms of residential housing. We're seeing a big push over the last couple of years for condominiums, simply because it's driven by economics. But that's primarily around the urban cores, and that's primarily in the best locations where that both high-rise and mid-rise condominium development activity is taking place. We're not seeing that much on the outlying areas, and it's got to be location driven with absolutely the best location amenities, and lots of times urban locations to make those things viable and feasible.
Okay, thanks. Got another question in the middle here.
There it goes. My name is Lee Carrig. I'm an architect in Ravalli County in Hamilton. I also sit on the Ravalli County Planning Board. I have a directed question in regard to sustainability in the investment market or in the investment profession. Do we see a growing interest in those of you or those in the world who speculate on real estate and its potential for in development in regard to assessing the sustainable populations that might exist in certain areas and parcels of land, specifically trying to determine density limits that remain in balance with what the land can give?
We are in the middle of a growth policy debate in Gallatin County right now, and a lot of that has to do with the sustainability and creating part of the smart growth trends of clustering homes and leaving large swaths of the undeveloped land for habitat, for wildlife, trail systems, the connectivity between neighborhoods. All those things, I think, are part of what people perceive to be as part of the amenity package when they're looking at development and looking at a property to move to. But the county that we're dealing with is one that's a closed basin, and I think Mary is on the panel tomorrow to talk about that. It used to be that going out and subdividing something and creating 1 acre lots and wells and septic tanks were fairly assured approvals because there was such a small demand for that. And I think in the county now we're seeing that if there is going to be this kind of influx and we are in a closed basin, what are those unintended consequences of the decisions that they're making now, or even decisions they made a few years ago?
Right, so I think what you're saying is from an investment standpoint, certainly the the water issues is something that an investor will take into consideration if that's part of what you're trying to get at. Bill, maybe you could comment on when you're analyzing the kind of the risk or investment potential of a property or project, to what extent are those sustainability issues a part of that assessment?
Well, I think that we would certainly have a sensitivity to that, but I think it's mostly going to be driven as to how marketable it's going to be. I think we would drive it by, if it's going to make it more marketable or less marketable, because that's the bottom line to it. They've got to get them sold. But I think, in general, and I go back, I think our county, and as you well know, sitting in our planning board, I think with society we're making some changes, and it's going to reflect through some of the things that we're doing right now as to what we approve. But we're pretty much bottom line. How marketable are they?
So therefore, the kind of investment impact of those issues comes through, what people want, essentially.
Are you doing, in Ravalli County, are you doing TDRs here? Well, transferable development rights.
Part of there's dialogue about that, and certainly there's some issues. Ravalli County is currently working on, a county-wide zoning project. Ravalli County and Bitterroot Valley is really a closed area bounded by mountain ranges on both sides. And Flathead County, Lake County, the Flathead area, thank you. Is similarly being stressed by the influx of a lot of people, and what I see are critical issues to the sustainability of the planet are areas like this that, without assessing their resources, inevitably overbuild and ultimately become the places that everybody tried to escape from. Right on.
I think we have time for one more question before lunch. If we have one more question or comment, I think there.
I'm Lisa Berardo, Collective Construction and Interiors. As a potential investor getting ready to buy a historic building in Lincoln, Montana, my question to you as a developer or a banker, what would be the best way to affect tourism to drive people into Lincoln, Montana, and to potentially make that small town of 1,100, the quaint little artsy city that I want it to be?
That's a tough question.
A lot of money.
I have investors.
Yeah. No, I actually was in Lincoln not too long ago, and I was somewhat surprised to see, of course, it's Main Street is Main Street. Quite a few businesses that have closed the doors and boarded up the doors, and things are for sale, and actually stayed at the little Three Bears Motel. And it's one of those things that I think is unfortunately part of growth, and I think a lot of people, I've said this many times to folks, that development will either happen to you or for you, and you need to kind of decide which side of that line drawn in the sand you want to be on. Smaller communities, irrespective of the state they're in, are and have been in trouble for decades. It's hard to keep the spirit alive when the town is shrinking, infrastructure problems become more dramatic, and I think it's just a problem that goes with places that cease growing. You can't stay, whatever the old saying is about stagnant water. I mean, you have to keep the flow, and I think growth, either whether you like it or not, is a very central part of keeping a either small or large community dynamic and on the upswing.
Yeah, do you have, I know there are a lot of old timber communities in northern Idaho that are similar kind of decline to mining towns. Do you see examples of where towns like that have been successful in revitalizing, and maybe what were some of the factors there?
Well, we see a real dichotomy between the two. There are communities like Sandpoint and Coeur d'Alene, Hayden and Post Falls that are growing very rapidly. That's driven by infrastructure and location and dynamics and demand and usually amenities, quality of life, job creation. And we see all kinds of small outlying rural communities that don't have any of those attributes, aren't creating jobs, aren't growing, are losing population. And you want to be able, as real estate professionals, to look at those communities and evaluate those things and make determinations of, you know, whether you're buying into a static community, into a growing community, or into a declining community. Because in terms of investment dollars, the investment performs differently, much differently if you're in a static community or a declining community versus a growing community. And you need to be able, that's all part of risk and investment evaluation.
Right, and I think that, you know, part of the question is you look at a town like Lincoln and you say, well, is Lincoln the next, you know, Victor, or, you know, is Lincoln just going to kind of disappear from the map, you know? And that's, you know, that's kind of the question there. And I don't know, you know, either how you assess that or how do you kind of make it happen in one direction or another. I mean, that's a tough question, but if anyone has anything to add on that.
I have some comment. In Stevensville, we've been doing a lot of work on revitalization. We've formed a Main Street Association, which is a national model that comes out of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And certainly that's available to you. We've actually visited with a couple of communities in Montana, one of them Fort Benton, and if you looked at the work they've done there through tax increment districts, they've done a number of innovative things. They've made some very interesting partnerships with numbers of organizations. They have a tremendous museum. They've done a lot of work. And also another model right now I think to look at is Phillipsburg. And we've just recently visited with those people. Matter of fact, we're in the process of taking a bus trip to Phillipsburg again to visit, you know, to go see it and study what successful communities are doing. And they are some, and you know, they're interesting. It takes money certainly, but energy seems to be the bottom line, and being able to bring people together, and then it seems like some of the money will follow. But certainly you got to have investment, and that's where your bank comes in.
Right. And I think also, you know, you probably, if I could add a last comment to that, you need a certain kind of perseverance. You know, these things don't happen overnight. You know, the revitalization of Phillipsburg is probably a 15, 20-year kind of process if they get where they want to go. And
Very
so
long
from
term.
an investment standpoint, that's a big factor too. Yeah. Okay, well, on that note, I think we're ready for lunch. Thanks very much to the panel.